Okay, so good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. This is Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon to figure out the future for smarter buildings. Great to have you here today. In case you're wondering who we are, the list of our profiles are on the mondaylive.org. And also just a point to note that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. And do post questions, comments, and other chit chat on the Zoom chat. It's much better if we make this as interactive as possible. And also, this deck is available on mondaylive.org in case you want any of the links for it. So this is our last Monday talking about industry metamorphosis. And it's been quite an interesting month so far, and hopefully we can wrap it up with the topic of today. And so our normal agenda, a normal chit chat, and then on the metamorphosis, we really want to talk about sort of the move from systems to system of systems. System of systems is actually a topic that we've covered before several times. But this is really the first time since we sort of thought about the smart building challenges from a cloud native perspective, and with the concept of the IBB sort of clear in our heads as well. So let's do that, and we have a great guest to be part of that knows quite a bit a thing or two about system of systems. But before we do that, hand it over to Ken. What's going on, Ken?
Thanks, Anto. Okay, we're hard at putting together our program for Chicago for the AHR, our free education sessions. We now have our agenda online, and we're just confirming the speakers. Although the speakers aren't there, we have most of them cornered, and we're just pulling together the final discussions with them, which is an interesting process because we're allowing the moderators to have a lot more input this year, and so kind of sometimes changing the gist, although keeping it in the same area of interest, but they're bringing all kinds of new ideas, and they're kind of evolving in a couple of directions. The other thing that I wanted to bring to the meeting was two things. The Smart Building Collective certification. That's an interesting thing out of Amsterdam, and I was wondering if anybody on the call today has had any experience with that, and they could share that. And then the other thing was the Smart Building Show in London. I think Roger might have gone to that, and if he has, could you, when I'm finished, could you maybe just tell us a little bit more about what you saw and what you think of that as a show? And then just to finish up, we now have a video online inviting you officially to come to Chicago to our session, which is 11 o'clock on Monday. And we're going to give you some lunch, and we're going to tell you the vision of where automated buildings is going in the future. So please take a quick look at that. Plus, I've been having a lot of fun flying over our first 20 years, and there's a bunch of other ones coming too. So I'm wallowing in the memories of the 25 years. It's amazing how many of you are all involved in that as well. It's kind of fun sometimes in these 3D flyovers to you can see somebody aging before your eyes. Back to you, Anto, unless Roger wants to add something.
Sure. Let me just so Smart Building Show was a couple of weeks ago. It's a 2-day event. People like Buildings IoT and people like that were there, but it was really well attended, and it's kind of changing where, you know, those sort of shows. There was one on in Paris at the same time called IBS. Those sort of shows, people used to have lots of controllers on their stands and lots of bits and pieces. That's not the case so much anymore. You know, there's a lot of displays and, you know, explanations and some demonstrations from screens. but not so many bits and pieces and boxes. So it's a lot more platforms. All the controls companies were there. I mean, everybody was there. It's just they're not showing all these instruments anymore. A lot of talk about hybrid working, and in fact, the process has started where they're now talking of where buildings have been emptied. They're already modifying all the floors to become sort of multi-tenanted rather than just a corporate HQ. And I'm being told at the moment that those that are being retrofitted or refurbished are about 80% sold already before the building's even completed. So bit of hope there for some of the businesses, although I'm not sure it can be for everyone, because if we don't need as much space. But certainly we're seeing that process underway.
Thank you very much for that. That was great, because I've linked to some stuff there that shows some pictures from the show, and you maybe can just follow out that LinkedIn link. Okay, back to you, Anto.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken. So, couple of things from my end, and this is a little bit different to what we've been seeing about New York real estate in the past few weeks and months. A couple of pieces, one from New York Post about developers are betting big time now, apparently, according to these guys, on building some new office towers. So all this sort of discussions that we had about tearing it down, maybe that's kind of the what's going to happen with new buildings going up rather than retrofit. So I wasn't sure about that. And then there's this other piece on in Washington Post that's sort of saying that it's not really as scary as it could be, looking at exactly how the office Armageddon, as it were, is going to spread to the banks. So I'm not sure how accurate or how good these two pieces are, but it was sort of a couple of pieces that are sort of pointing in a positive direction. So I thought I brought them up, bring them up to the group. Also, I saw another piece about the Flatiron building in New York, which is a famous, very thin building that they've decided to convert that into residential of some sort. So that should be an interesting thing, because it's not a very attractive building from a residential perspective, because there's hardly any space in it and it's very thin. So anyway, just some interesting dynamics going on in New York.
I'm curious on that. Have you guys seen this YouTube channel? It's BIM.
BIM with a.
I just put it in there. They're the guys talking about how they're actually building buildings in Frankfurt that are modular, that are like, okay, we can make it commercial real estate, we can make it office, we can make it like they could just change it on a dime depending on what's going on in the economy. It's kind of like modular, and they were doing this before the pandemic, so that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I saw that YouTube, and the core, the key to that strategy is actually the elevators. They've made the elevators so that it becomes flexible. And what occurred to me on that is the elevator is one of the very first systems that go into the building. So it's not something that gets changed very frequently, because it's literally in the core, really very difficult to change. So while it's interesting piece, I'm not sure how scalable that is because of that.
Yeah.
Oh, wasn't one of the pitches that they were actually going to put multiple cars in the shaft? I thought that was intriguing.
Yes, but you can't retrofit that to an elevator system that was installed 60 years ago. That's kind of really difficult to do at it.
I kind of read it the opposite. I read it as you would basically gut
okay.
You would gut it, and you would use the concrete core, and you would actually run multiple cars inside of the core, and then basically control them with the kind of sophistication we now have. I may have misread that. I often do.
Well, I may have misread it. If what you say is right, then that could be really interesting. Yeah.
I thought it incredibly. My imagination just went back. The idea of several cars inside of the same shaft.
Rick.
Yeah,
she
just
wants
real
me as
quickly.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we've got the monthly office hour coming up this Thursday, and there's the link to be able to register for it. And again, what we intend to do there is kind of have an open discussion of whatever is on the attendees' minds, but we'll specifically be trying to orient things around the work that the coalition has been doing relative to 2525, the IBB, and now the prep for the next slide, which is the getting ready for AHR and how people can individually or as a company or as an engineer or as a consultant participate in what we're doing in getting ready for the Smarter Summit in conjunction with Monday Live. Will be the second annual everybody in the industry getting together the day before AHR kicks off to talk about the momentum for smarter build that is happening within the smarter building community. And so you will be hearing from us about sponsorship opportunities, and the Tin Cup will be out for helping to sponsor the reception that'll be at the end of the Smarter Summit, and that's it for me.
Cool, very good.
Rick,
Yeah, and
could you in general just talk a little bit more about how we're going to promote the Smarter Summit?
Yeah. Now that we kind of have an idea of what we're going to be doing with the Smarter Summit, and we're working on the agenda for it, we'll start to reach out back to the some of the organizations that are on the board behind me that you can't read. Yep. Our affiliations with the with organizations like BIG and formerly CABA, leverage Ken's contacts out obviously through Automated Buildings, and we have these relationships in place with 5 or 6 different organizations, and we'll try and go to their membership to drive awareness of what we're doing. Okay. Again, the primary thing at this year's Smarter Summit will be that we will be going from last year, where we got everybody's agreement on interoperability is good, to this year, where we're showing some actual interoperability in play and some pathways for actually accomplishing more interoperability, whether that's using the Division 2525 spec or leveraging the reference platform that is IBB, or leveraging some of the other technologies that we'll be demonstrating. So is that helpful?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, so make your travel plans to AHR to accommodate for that, accommodate for this, hopefully, and it should be a good event.
Is there a site for Smarter Building
Not
Summit?
yet.
The
Not yet. There will be.
Doesn't have anything on it.
Not yet. There will be a site in the next.
Sorry, I thought I was missing.
Yeah, we obviously had a site last year. Our various links that we'll need to have another one added for the Smarter Summit 24 TBD. Yeah, and that's it. Any other thoughts that anybody that we've missed want to bring up before we move on? Hearing none, I am going to bring Glen Allmendinger onto the panel here to join us in our conversation in the last week of Metamorphosis about systems to system of systems. So the sort of the thinking behind this is that we've been talking about cloud native, obviously quite significantly in the last few months. And cloud native inherently has lots of things, lots of systems that are connected to it. That's kind of part of its sort of core thing, is actually it's about connecting different systems together. So we thought that this would be a sort of a good time to sort of pick up this subject again of system of systems, so actually dig in deeper in terms of understanding what it is. And there's really nobody better to do that than Glen, who's been writing quite a number of really interesting articles on system of systems in the context of industrial systems that we're involved in. So Glen, are you with us? You have your mic on, your camera on, your... You're muted. There you go.
I've got my last inch sorted.
Okay.
After all.
So do you want to, can we give you sort of a few minutes to sort of frame the conversation about why system of systems is really so important as we get into this sort of complexity of building systems that we keep on talking about?
Sure. Well, Anto, as you know, well, anyway, thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here. Nice to see faces I haven't seen in a while, and I hope I can add some value. We've been calling these complex, adaptive, and eventually autonomous systems, but I think I do think the more basic, grounded way of viewing this is a system of systems. And I always use the analogy of an automobile. You know, the subsystems in an automobile, particularly the powertrain, braking, and safety and so forth systems, obviously have to behave in a very interlocked and highly integrated and performance dependent or deterministic fashion. And I think an economist, Brian Arthur, once came out with this notion or concept of combinatorial technologies. He had spent a long time and wrote a great book back in the early 2000s on the evolution of technology and innovation. And when he uses the term combinatorial, what he eventually decided was that the way the world evolves is you have these elements and subsystems and elements within any larger system. So, you know, whether it's the power distribution system in a building, the physical security, HVAC, or I go back to the car, it's the powertrain or the brakes, or I think of a supply chain or a factory. The interdependence factor obviously varies from domain to domain, and but these systems will eventually become building blocks. And the analogy that's really easy to use is, you know, the GPS system that's now a module in your smartphone was once a collection of, I believe, 10 or 11 or 12, I can't remember the exact number, specific technologies, of which, you know, the module in your smartphone was the first time they all got essentially combined into a standard unit that could be applied many times over. And the whole impact of combinatorial says that more and more of the sub-elements of any of these systems will become standard building blocks over time. And as those building blocks become more standardized and they work well together, you know, the interactions and collaboration that can occur between subsystems become something that opens up a lot of possibilities for optimizing the system of systems. And, you know, so you think of energy in a building, or even just comfort and convenience in various factors, or you're trying to think about organizing a meeting with a lot of AV and interactions with a whole bunch of other systems within a building. Like, these systems need to be able to communicate with each other. They need to be able to, you know, essentially cooperate or collaborate within an open, interoperable context. But all of a sudden, you know, optimization can grow from the ability to link these systems and have them collaborate and not violate their original purpose and function. And obviously, this raises the complexity of these systems. That's why we've been calling them complex adaptive systems. But in that context, you know, I put buildings kind of equidistant between the most advanced interlock set of systems, like a car, and the least might be a playground or something. I'm not sure what, but you know, I would describe the building world as kind of inching along towards this, but not necessarily doing everything in its power to get there. And I think the two primary ingredients to driving that kind of orchestration and optimization from a system of systems tends to be, you know, essentially the standards and technical underpinnings, and the standards that feed those technical underpinnings in a way that allow for that kind of collaboration, communications, shared data, et cetera. And that ranges from basic connectivity standards all the way to, you know, data and more complex interrelationships. So on one side, it's really just the technical plumbing diagram and how open and interoperable and how well organized is that for multiple parties from different businesses to collaborate. And then the other side of it, I would say, is in fact an ecosystem, and in a business context standpoint, that the way people organize networks of partners and relationships and delivery of services and value and technology, I think in many respects, the building systems world probably is still a collection of walled or semi-walled gardens and command and control networks. And so orchestrating the ecosystem in parallel with orchestrating the technology and the underlying plumbing diagram, I think, are the two ingredients that gets us to a closer to these to the value that these kinds of system of systems can render. And so I think the evolution of this largely gets back to behavior and how well organized are we to get this stuff organized. And I know you guys have been working on a lot of this, and I think progress is being made. We could probably do some things to speed it up or make it more effective, but I think it's within those relationships, technical or business wise, where the magic lies.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Glenn. So I'm glad that you brought up the sort of the notion that system of systems isn't just a technical term. It really impacts not just the technology, but how you use it and the ecosystem and the collaboration. Is all of that is really sort of part of really what the system of systems is all about.
Right.
And that's a really sort of great point to start this conversation. Open it up to the group. Any thoughts? Any questions?
Okay. I'll get started. Hi, Glenn.
Hi, Steve. How you doing?
I'm fine. I'm fine. So I've been arguing or promoting the idea that the system of systems in our world is the need for all these independent or siloed applications to be able to interoperate.
Yeah.
On the assumption that they can't do that today very easily. So we've gone through, a couple decades now of trying to normalize data at the protocol layer.
Yeah.
And I think we've done largely a good job of that. Okay.
Yeah. Fine.
The world has moved to applications that in so many different ways. I mean, from a homeowner standpoint, or just as a buyer of whatever it is you're doing online today, you have applications all over the place, right? Your phone is full of applications, and they're easy to install, easy to deploy, easy to use, and that same kind of capability is not available in our world. Okay, because we're not architected to allow that to happen. So the shift for me is from protocol normalization to application interoperability, if you will. And I was just wondering if you had maybe a better way of describing what I was just trying to communicate. But that's the transition I'm viewing as the system of systems challenge for us.
Yes, I mean, I definitely agree that I think that the center of gravity on the whole thesis has kind of shifted to what do I do about data now? And I guess I would just set context first, which is, we're so accustomed when we sit on, on our computers looking at things on the internet, and we're looking through a browser from somebody like Google, right? Right. Much as you were describing, you have this kind of uniform world and everything fits together, and all this stuff tends to interoperate in ways that are pretty straightforward and sort of kind of invisible almost. I would argue in the B2B world, like buildings, that we tried to study this a couple of years ago for a client where they were trying to figure out if you're going to go model all these kinds of systems and make that kind of data from that modeling available, where's the data coming from? And we more or less reached the conclusion that probably more than half the data any business in a B2B kind of context will need to essentially drive this kind of cooperation or collaboration amongst systems will probably be data that comes from other people's systems.
Right.
Right. And so I guess number one ingredient here is for lack of a better term, so you have the data model, you have data models that can enable some of that, but the other piece of it is just being able to make data available in some sort of federated way.
Correct.
So whether people are charging for it or not charging for it, you have to have ways to federate that kind of data in order for multiple parties to be able to dip and partake and give and receive and so forth. And I don't see nearly as much discussion about that as I think there should be, because again, I think this gets back to relationships and in a business context and how people think about ecosystems evolving, because I think this is what you were describing earlier is largely a shift to a data ecosystem, and hard to describe anything in the buildings world that would approximate that today.
Right. Yeah. And that's that exactly. So, and that's what I view as the challenge to make this, the idea of a system of systems. So the systems are your building automation, your lighting control, your access control, your video surveillance, all those things are the systems. And we're trying to pull it together into a system, a singularity, whereby whatever level of integration I want to get from those subsystems, I can bring into my world that I'm calling my system, and do that in a transparent, seamless fashion with little or no perceived effort relative to what that requires today.
Right, exactly. And so, I mean, we could all talk for a long time about how to make all this happen, but if you just assume at the end of the day that, I mean, I think the building owners ultimately probably will have to demand this to some extent and be interested in cooperating. I always think of the government as a good place to start. They certainly own a lot of buildings, a lot of data in them. Probably a good place to convince somebody that there's, value in this. But I think to some extent, I think people don't even really understand the value in this, and in many respects, that's probably as much the hurdle as anything technical is. But and at this point, if you look at just kind of the evolution of things like open source software tools today, it's pretty easy to build cheap and simple data aggregating overlays over existing siloed systems, right? You just need to understand how to access the silo in order to get the value of that. And I think that even that's getting easier for people to do. So I think we're close to the point where a lot of these kinds of tools can be, there's not an economic, there's not an idiot tax for adding some cheap technology that allows you more access to the data. It's just a question of who's really trying to get it organized and do things with it. And so, there's a roles dimension of this. What's the role for those who want to see this kind of happen, and who's trying to drive that federation of data? There's, just technical things that still need to come into play. And then there's, somebody has to kind of sit at the center of the whole thing, almost like a hub and spoke story, and say, hey, let's do this because we need to do this because there's value in it. And they understand that there's economic benefit from optimizing these kinds of systems.
Yes, Glenn, it's interesting because, I mean, technically, this is not a challenge. We can do all the technical things. This is a commercial issue of, effectively who wants this stuff, who's driving it, who needs it. Because quite honestly, technically we can do this. This is not a problem.
Right.
It's now a matter of commercially who's going to pull this through. Is that fair?
Strongly. And I don't know, I guess in the building space, it just seems from like a technical maturity standpoint, wherever we are on that curve, it's like every other innovation, and all the innovators talk about it every cycle of smart buildings. You still don't really have people who are kind of on top of the value of leveraging data and all this. I think people are stumbling into it, but it's a little bit like, am I buying a BMS system or am I actually buying data aggregation and analytics? And what do we mean by those two things? So So it's not even well categorized and spoken about in some respects, and just the way the narrative evolves, it's not that clear. I think it's just unclear to a lot of people that should be paying attention to this, that they should be, and this is what it's about.
Glenn, the one thing you mentioned a few moments ago, it's stuck in my head, is that as a system, the chances are the data that you need is going to be in another system.
Right.
You said something along those lines, which is really quite sort of profound. But I was kind of trying to look at it the other way around.
Right.
To say that the data that I have is actually useful to other systems.
Right. Right.
Right. And it seems to me that the silo sort of thinking that we've all been grown up with has sort of prevented that from being something of value. In other words, if it's mine, then I don't really want to share it, or I don't really want to put in the effort to make it available to other people. Is that sort of at the core of the problem? Because then if I don't make it available to other people, then other people, it's hard for them to get it, and therefore the system of systems doesn't work.
Well, right. And I do think it's kind of a whatever quasi-governance problem. I mean, just an anecdote on a project we were working on. We met for half a day with a bunch of people at Procter and Gamble. And this is on, all the little codes you see printed on packaging, expires by thus and such date, or here's my genealogy number so I can track my bottle of pills back to the source and know if I got poisoned by them, why. And the client we're working for prints those things and is looking at the data value of that across supply chains. And in the case of Procter & Gamble, if you really wanted to track and trace something across their entire supply chain, there are something like upper teens, I think it was like 17 or 18 places you would need to go, access a silo, get some data from it and aggregate it, and use it to continue to track the object through its life cycle. And, that isn't that far off buildings. I'm sure there must be 18 silos in a building someplace, right? Right. And so not only is it the individual owner of the data, and I think even in the same organization, I think people are paranoid about giving other people access to data in mission critical environments and context. I just think they worry that something will happen or something will get corrupted or otherwise. But you've heard me say this before, Answer. My analogy here is this is like a preschool thing where my kids are being taught we share because we care. That's how data ecosystems of the future should work, right? If Tommy gets a candy bar, I get to share it with him. And I think in this sense, the data, I got to give to get in order to get that value. Right. And I think that's in the most fundamental way. I think people, for all the reasons they want to hoard or protect or govern, the use of the data in their domain within multiple domains. I think the issue is they don't really see this as a give to get story.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
I'd say that's an understatement. That in the world of system of systems, the world would be great. And kind of playing off a couple of comments, Rogers and then Antos. We've got all the technology we need. If you would just bring all your data to me and let me have all of your data and let me be the silo that is in control, then we've got all the data, all the technology we need. But what you described earlier, and I'm just highlighting it, is the standards for interoperability for that sharing, for the creating value by sharing is, I feel like the technology for that isn't quite there. So the marketplace for data, which then causes the selfishness that I was describing earlier. Just, well, if you guys would just bring all the data to me, everybody'd be good.
Right.
You're describing a different SOS, Rick. That's a silo of silos, right?
Well, and I like this other acronym, the OPS, other people's systems. OPS.
Right.
That's but being able to quantify the value of the data that I have and be able to put almost like a price tag on it. So price and availability of data, making it available is one thing, making it and putting a price tag on my data for you to use it. I would say that marketplace hasn't evolved. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. It is other places though. There are players like in the transportation systems business now. One that comes to mind is Autonomo, which is essentially, creating a layer of technology that's organizing and orchestrating essentially a shared data layer, but also has built into it the ability to create values for that data, so people can rent other people's data or otherwise. And those, I used to think this was a superfluous layer that would eventually evaporate because everybody would just get it when they share data, which is, I think I've been wrong about. So to some extent, there probably is some value. I mean, there must certainly be some value in organizing this so that it could exist in an economic context and have some value, and people could make decisions based on that and be motivated to contribute to that.
Can I bring it back around to what Steve was talking about a little bit? Is it just not being asked for? Do end users not see a value in this, and therefore they're not demanding it? Is that the core economic problem here that we're facing, do you think?
I don't know this with absolute certainty, but my gut tells me that's all this is about, which is if the building owner or the proxy of the building owner were more directly motivated and understood that there was essentially, money to be saved or money to be made or both, if they were armed and had context and understood this, I think they would make more demands upon their suppliers to help them enable it. I just don't think they get it.
Yeah, I think, hey Glenn, it's Arno. So interestingly enough, I ran into without the details, we had a client last week who made some data available to us to do that for a system that they had already paid for and installed, right? It was occupancy data and stuff. And they had already paid for it and installed, and they'd asked us if we could reuse the data for another purpose, which we did. So the interesting thing that came about, though, was that in the process of doing that, they gave us access to the API. And of course, we pulled all the data that we could from that API that we thought was of interest. And the client came back to us and said, hey, you got to stop pulling data from this set of buildings. And we went, sure, but why? And they said, well, the IoT company is charging us to get access to that data for other purposes. So in their contract, and I thought, well, okay, this is a business model problem that you should have probably addressed when you did the contract.
Yeah.
The fact that they are now charging you for others to use access to the data, which I'm thinking is your data. So we had some interesting discussions around that. But this is a model I've seen a couple of times now where the IoT guys are trying to get secondary funds after they've, and there's some subtlety in their contracts that the client doesn't quite understand.
Well, I think there's a lot of that running around. I mean, we've seen a bunch of businesses that are monitoring things like rotating equipment and building databases so they can kind of, you can run a new piece of equipment by their historic analysis and be able to judge your, the quality of the thing you're trying to run. And right. So yes, data governance eventually stretches the data economics, which eventually stretches back to the whole contractual context.
Right.
Data.
Yeah, I mean, Mark and I have talked about this in the past, that the fundamental principle, at least he and I believe in, is that the data should always be owned by the owner, the building owner,
right.
Period.
Right.
There should be no ownership of data by the suppliers.
Yeah, but the clever part that these guys did, Steve, was that they said, yeah, it's your data, but to get access to it through our API, it was going to cost.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is the answer to all of this openness, which is, I call it the API idiot tax, but
yeah.
But again, I've been deploying essentially an ERP system for for the business I run now, and I'm doing it with multiple suppliers, and all of the suppliers offer their integration APIs at no charge. It's just you just enable it. There's some configuration time potentially, but which is not great, but you know, it's straightforward. So the IT world is running, you know, I'm involved in running a business as opposed to running a building or operating a building. And
Right.
so if I'm going to operate a building, then all the systems that I need that are in that within that context, those systems should be able to be integrated from a data perspective without, you know, as we said, we know we can do this, but as suppliers, we need to make it seamless and easy for our customers to do that.
Right. This would probably be the place where I can interject. At least one of the things I'm observing about all this generative AI madness going on now is that people are paranoid about opening their data up so AI models can read it and understand it. Right? And so
They're just passing the new legislation they announced today, right? To start to put labeling and limits on a lot of that.
yeah, that's
Jim, it looked like you wanted to say something when we were talking about the economic value proposition for end users. I know you've commented on that before.
I have, and hi Glenn, it's Dr. No here.
hey doctor.
Oh, you know, I've been in this industry a long time, and I've puzzled till my puzzler's sore as to whether there really is enough economic value here for people to get excited about. And ultimately, I come off with the fact that there is. But fundamentally, the thing that we always are on the losing side of when we're at an enterprise level is we help people save money. We don't help them make money. And if you look at a lot of compelling value propositions that get adopted by an enterprise,
Right.
they're things that help them make money.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, we're absolutely stuck where the value propositions that we can bring are not visible to business movers and shakers who are decision makers as to what the business is actually going to do. And we get relegated to a cost savings bucket, which is not a very big percentage of what they do.
Right.
Your retort to that?
I couldn't agree more. I you know, the problem is so much of what goes on in buildings is about saving things more than it is about making money. And so you have this natural gravitational force working against you from the get-go, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I would second that. I go to a lot of restaurant brands conferences, you know, their internal conferences. And if you go to a 3-day conference where you've got educational sessions and meetings going on all day long for 3 days straight, maybe 1 hour of that, they talk a little bit about facilities. The rest of the time is spent on here's the newest promotion and here's the newest menu item and here's, you know, what we're doing with the co-ops, and it's all on that revenue generating side. There's kind of an inside joke. If it's not on or related to the menu, then you're not on or on the menu, right? So they're not very interested in that. So
Frustrating.
All right. I was going to keep quiet all day, but I'm not going to. All right. So,
No.
first of all, Jim Lee, what you just said, I could not agree more. So that begs for us as an industry to change the conversation. All right. Ultimately, it's all about the data, but change the conversation. To your point, we'll save you this, we'll save you that. But how do you, to your point, how do you make money? Well, the data is going to increase the value of your building as an asset, number one, as an example. And I'm not saying I have all the answers. Number two is the fact that when I go to another way is the marketability of that building. If I am in the lease space, I have to market that building and try to get it 100% occupied. And so what do? Data is going to help me in the marketability of that building. So I am making money. And there's others, and I won't dwell on those. And the other thing that I think continues to be a major problem, and we have been talking about data for how many years now? The value of data. We can get it, we can integrate it, we can normalize it. Yep, we can put it up in the cloud. You can get it 24/7 if you want. There is not enough people who understand true building and facility data, as I see it. Ultimately, if you go talk to a business, a building is part of a business. You go talk to them from a business perspective and you talk about the value of data, they get it. They understand it. They know how to interpret the data. They know how to do things with the data. They know how to gain value. When you go talk to that same business about building data, they look at you like, what are you talking about? You know, ultimately. So I think part of that problem is there is not enough people who truly understand the value and what you can get from data from buildings.
I'm with you on the, there are, if you listed the 10 most important things to a facility owner, you know, we're not on that list, or at best we're at the bottom of that list. And things like, you know, asset value, resaleability, marketability, leasability, all of those things come so far above saving energy when just put in that context, that we do need to change the discussion about how do we impact all those important things, right?
Yeah. Very fair.
So Anno, knowing who you're affiliated with now, as far as your day job is concerned, I would think that data would have a significant, could have a significant impact on the profitability of the company you work for.
Yeah.
Is that
and
seen as such?
Yeah, it was kind of part of my answer to Mark, I think. You know, the value of the data is very much a function of who wants to use it and who needs to use it, and such like. So folks like ourselves, yeah, I mean, it is a big deal, right? I mean, because it's not in our world, it's not an ROI for the client, it's an ROI for us, right? It has
Exactly.
Back to
you're affiliated with a property management firm, and any other property management firm that's out there should be thinking in these terms to drive their profit, their bottom line to their shareholders.
Right, which talks to Jim's point, right? Is if it's the data is used as part of your business, as it is in our case, then I'm highly motivated to make it work. Right. If I'm a IoT company trying to sell a solution to a building owner about how I'm going to save him some energy, yeah, we've all been there and know that that's a giant hill to climb. So the who is really important in the equation, right? But yeah, you're right. In our context, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons we're doing what we're doing. Right.
And you're approaching that more from a building management standpoint, facility management, than a building owner.
Yeah,
right?
It's actually, we call it smart FM. It's actually, that's the term that we use. It's not a smart buildings. It's not a, you know, data. It's how do we make facility management smarter, right, to affect our bottom line.
Is this the point to bring up the sort of the subtle distinction between data and information? Because there's a lot of data obviously in buildings, and ultimately facility management company or individual is not mostly going to be acting on data. They're going to act on some data that's been formed to whatever the situation is, so that they can be informed to do something or something else.
Well,
right? They're not actually looking at the data. They're looking at something that's been presented to them.
In fact, when you extend that thought, which is really interesting, the real fun part is the same data can actually be used for multiple different things from an information perspective, especially for an FM company, you know, or any property management. there's many things you could use occupancy data for, right? From the whole spectrum of, and it's when you go down that path, it's kind of, we have fun little workshops about all things that you can do with occupancy data as a facility management. It's really fun coming up with all sorts of innovative ideas and solutions that you could use the same data for differently.
But how do you measure that in a way that you can then say that this piece of data is 10 times more valuable than another piece of data?
Yeah, so it goes back to, so our big impetus is us, right? What are the resources? And it kind of talks to Mark's earlier point. We can't get enough folks in the organization to do facility. You can't have enough people to do physically to do the work, right? Or it's too cost prohibitive to do so, or you just can't find them because the experts aren't out there. So we measure initially this use of the data of how many times can I use the same data for multiple functionality. The more I can use the same piece of information, you know, if it's temperature sensors, what are the multiple things that I could use temperature, space temperature for? If it only comes up as, you know, 1, 2, 3 things, then things like occupancy data has a lot more value, right? Because I can do a lot more interesting things with that. And then where are my most expensive resources that I'm impacting? Yeah, cleaning services is always an interesting one, but you know, to be honest, cleaning services in Asia, not a big deal, right? Cleaning services in the US, yeah, interesting and compelling. But so, you know, facility services, right? If it's specialist technician time and space that I'm saving, then yeah, that has a big impact on the value of the data that I'm collecting. So again, who is the people that I'm using the data for, and what's the
is there a vector from building data to be connected to commercially valuable information for building owners? Is there some model for doing that? Because what you've talked about, I know, is for the facilities management. We get that. But how about for the owner or the occupier or the tenant of a particular facility? Is there some kind of model to draw the line between the data to?
Well, their model is always, and I think Tracy mentioned it, right? Their model is, ours is a race to the bottom. You know, it's always every 3 years, the other guy comes in and says, I can do it for 10% less, right? And the only way that you can do it for 10% less is by continually introducing technology or smarter, faster ways of doing what you used to do before, or you're willing to take some loss on it because of some other play that, you know, who knows. So the value that the owner sees is that he's getting facility managed at a less cost, right? And that you are continuing to still provide the same, if not better, service level agreements in that process. You can't compromise your SLAs in that process. It has to be equal, if not better, than what you were providing. So that's their measure, right? So how you do that and how clever you can do that is up to you, right?
But if you did come up with some way of tying data with that business being actually more profitable, unrelated to facilities, then that could work, but that's hard to think of what that kind of thing is.
It comes back to what Mark was saying about you need to speak in terms of what has value to the customers, right? Energy savings by itself isn't, you know, that's like somebody saying, I'm going to save you 10 cents a day on your coffee. And I'm not going to drive an extra mile to do it or pay you a subscription of $40 a month to make that happen, you know?
Tracy, I think you presented a Monday Live some time ago. I think a sheet that you did for.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that actually.
That equated the energy savings to how many Big Macs or something like that.
Transactions, yeah.
Transactions.
Yeah. That really opens some eyes when you can do that kind of a thing. And I was just thinking we have to find the commercial building version of that. But one of the things that we would talk to owners about is show them that information. Look, this is the equivalent of this many new sales every day, new customers every day. That's what a transaction is. And then I would ask the question, how many marketing programs do you guys launch for this amount of money that generates that kind of traction? And does it one-time fee forever? Right? As opposed to marketing, which you typically have to hit and hit and hit and hit again, right? Continuous sort of a thing. And that opens people's eyes up when you start thinking that way. And they start thinking, oh, okay, there is something to this. It's not just as easy as reducing my energy spend. There is a different way to look at this value. So, and it wasn't that we were saving them any more money by saying it that way, just speaking in a language that they understood a little bit better.
Let me ask you guys a question. So this group of highly experienced people in this space, the question is this, and the answer is yes or no only. Don't get into that's all you can answer. Yes or no is your only, or I plead the fifth. I'm going to use Mark's famous lightning round. Is this, do you think most building owners and operators look at their buildings, look at their facilities as part of their business? In other words, they look at people as, I got to have people to produce my product, to deliver my service. I have to have goods and materials. If I'm producing a product, I need X, Y, Z. That's for my business. So do building owners and operators look at their buildings and facilities as contributing to the business or part of the business?
And are you saying just commercial building owners or?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or owner occupied.
Yeah. Yeah. Anto.
Well,
Yes.
Ken.
Not so much.
Stevie.
Depends on the
That's
type
not the answer.
depends. Sorry, it does.
All right, okay. Anno.
I think it's changed. It used to be not anymore.
No. Tracy.
No, probably not.
Rick.
100%.
That's not the answer. Anyway, that's all right. We'll take it. Roger.
No,
That's the new way of saying yes, by the way.
I know. Glenn.
No.
Jim.
No.
So there you go. So
But
how do
that's,
we?
but that's the question is a little bit misleading because it can impact the owner's business as a cost as a profit, right? In both ways, you're impacting that. That's how I said yes, is because it is a cost.
But at the end of the day, is how do you change the owner's perception? I think it's no. They don't think of it every day as that. Yeah. Sure, to whoever said, oh, I'll save 10 cents on my energy bill or whatever. But it goes back to what Jim Lee said. It's turning it from savings to making money.
But before I forget, Anto, if you want a new way of wrapping up this session, I like Mark's quick lightning round that he just did. Maybe we should do that for every session.
Patented. And sorry.
Too late. I already stole it.
Sorry,
you have to pay license fees to Mark.
That's right.
Yeah, license it now.
For subscription fee, I'll let you use it.
All right. So it being past 4 o'clock, we need to start to wrap this. Well, it's in fact way past, so we're going to wrap it. So that lightning round was the end of the show. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Glenn. Have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Adios.